love seeing him. We haven't seen him in a long
He's the
time.
producer director.
Yeah. Okay, ready? All right, I'll be open this meeting, special meeting, and it's time. So I think we do roll call.
Yeah.
Call. President Gidry,
Here.
Vice President Hurtain,
Present.
Clerk Sang,
Here.
Trustee Chang, not present, and Trustee Bond, not currently present.
Okay, well, we have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and move to the next one is the approval of today's agenda.
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second? All right, so we don't need to do roll call, do we? So raise your hand, say aye. Aye. Motion passes. So now we move into closed session. Oh, public comment on closed session. Seeing no public comments or public at this point, we will move on to closed session. See you in a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
And we're going to the
All right, so we're back out of closed session, gaining at least one more board member. Although we had all of us there for the session. And we come out of closed session and there is, the board took no action. So I believe we can end closed session. And we're now on to PLC learning. Is there a public comment section before that? So I don't have to look up my agenda.
I will have to look at the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Let's check the agenda.
I'll like see who can call it up first. It was right there. Too many steps to get there.
Special board meeting.
So are those documents posted also
Oh, here we go.
to our agenda?
No, there is, the public comment section is after, because it's a report discussion item, so we're going into report discussions.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is professional learning communities, and so we do that first, and then we do a public comment before we
Right.
adjourn.
Yes, yes.
So I didn't have it.
So we're beginning this session a little bit later than we had planned. It's 10:17 and I need to finish by 11:15 to get over to a meeting at Los Gatos. So hopefully we can move through this quickly. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Splain, and Dr. Splain and I will be kind of tag teaming back and forth.
Thank you, Dr. Grove, and good morning, members of the board. It's a delight for me to be here with you this morning. Good morning also to Drs. Bosco, Dr. Grove, and to Jane, the one who ultimately really makes it happen around these parties. So-
Can I just have a quick question? Because I look at the agenda, there's no attachment.
I just saw that and I don't know why, so let me look into that for you.
Okay, because I just want to make sure.
There wasn't an attachment at the board, but there were in the Friday letter.
I know, yeah.
So, you're right, it wasn't in the, I noticed that too, I didn't think about it.
Went to Santi Renate.
I got it.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about the interruption.
Oh, thank you for that. It's important that we
include
have that accompany the discussion. So I'm glad that you called attention to that. So while that is being brought up, let's set.
So what order are we going through all these documents?
So,
All of those were just background for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I already have them all memorized. Okay.
You got it. There's a pop quiz at the end.
It's one of the two acronyms, C something A and EOS, you know,
Yeah.
they had two great ones.
essential learning outcome
Yeah,
ELOs.
that's the test.
ELOs,
That's
yeah.
right, ELOs.
and common formative assessment, CFA.
I can tell, back in the day, you guys just ruined the grading curving. Because you guys were just through the roof.
Yeah, we are right here.
I can already tell.
Yeah, I was up late last night looking at these things. Yeah, okay,
Okay, ready.
so we're ready.
All
Want to
right.
explain?
All right, so set just a little bit of context for our discussion this morning. Thank you to Dr. Grove for reminding me to remain as efficient as possible with stewardship this morning. But regarding PLCs and regarding school districts, ultimately, while that's being pulled up, I'm understanding, right?
Ben's
Copy. Ultimately, if our collective purpose as a school district is to help all students achieve high levels of learning, high levels for learners who struggle, high levels for students who currently excel. If that is our fundamental purpose, and if various ways we come to understand that not all students are realizing that particular goal, then it should be incumbent on an organization to be willing to re-examine the way in which it does business for children. part of that examination could be the question. Should we develop and employ effective systems that do not rely on individual excellence, teachers, classroom, nor on students that are well-equipped walking into the classroom to excel? Should we develop systems that ensure the highest quality of instruction is afforded to every single student? In the end, all means all. So let's go ahead and next slide, please. Peter, I saw you might have had a hand up, so I want to press pause and check in on if you had a question.
I had 2 points and I sent 3 or 4 messages to Mike this morning with those points in more detail. Number 1 is I wanted to try to quantify or have in some way measurability for that phrase, high level of learning, because that's undefined. And my proposal for what that means is 2 things: that there's 100% graduation rate and that there's 100% pass rate for core subjects. To me, that's what high level of achievement is.
Thank you.
And the thing that's missing from all of your PLC discussions is assessment of teacher effectiveness, of teacher skills, I should say.
We'll get to that.
So thank you so much.
Because you never assess teachers.
So,
We do.
thank you for that. We will, during the presentation, be able to fill in some of those systemic elements that you talked about. That's where we go from what the general structure is going to be versus what Los Gatos, Saratoga High School districts will be. Additionally, in the interest of time, please use any writing utensils and note scratch paper to capture your questions. And if you can help us capture those questions and reference the slide title or theme at the end when we do take questions, that would help us remain efficient. So thank you so much, Trustee Fertan.
And as part of that making it efficient, slide numbers should be provided.
Copy that. So we're going to go backwards 1.
Okay.
Keep going to the next slide. There we go. Objectives. So what are our objectives today?
Oh.
To have quality discussion with one another here, our professional colleagues, to be able to define what a PLC is, not simply as we heard Trustee Fertan allude to, a general framework, but specifically, what will the details look like for the Los Gatos Saratoga Union High School District? And we will also frame the last element, which is the rationale. This PLC stuff, why now? Why us? Why this? So we'll be able to frame that discussion as well. Next slide, please. All right. So it's early in the morning. So I want to help get our neural activity going.
You know, we've been meeting since 8.
I'm still gonna get you going. So wherever you are now, I'm gonna level you up, just like a good PLC
Yeah,
does.
but Jane only provided coffee when we came back.
I know.
I always respect the baseline, but I'm always gonna take you to the next level.
I appreciate that.
So the reason I got into it to do with Cynthia was to build up my,
That's why you have so much energy now?
to be prepared for,
Get those testosterone flowing,
not testosterone, other hormones.
other hormones. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't think of it that way.
All right, closer, Peter, I'll elbow you right now, give you a high five. All right, so we're gonna do an activity called Think, Write, Share. So at this part, I'm gonna give you an activity and I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to do nothing but reflect, some quiet think time. During this time, I want you to reflect on the phrase professional learning community. And even though we're going to drill down later on in this discussion towards professional learning communities in schools, right now, allow those guardrails of schools to go away. You can think about what they might be in Cisco. You can think about what they might be for a nonprofit. You can think about what they might be absolutely in schools, but just kind of reflect for 30 seconds and then write your reflections down for an additional 2 minutes. So 30 minutes of think time, 2 minutes of writing it down on your own quietly. What comes to mind with this phrase? Ready, go.
But you make them wait for me.
Of course,
Yeah.
nothing happens when you're not around.
The only person who really thinks that is my dog.
Well, that's one smart cookie.
And the dog gets a reward.
Yes, that's exactly why.
Okay, you're all doing great. Another minute and a half. Thirty seconds. Ten seconds. And we are back. In the interest of time, I'm going to pivot away from our resetting some small groups into group time, and we're just going to share out now, just in the interest of time. So, Peter, what were some thoughts, reflections that you were able to capture that came to mind in terms of the phrase professional learning community?
So it's a set of the set of individuals collaborating to improve student outcomes.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, me?
Okay.
So you were trying to get us to think outside of the student
Absolutely.
school environment. So I put kind of like a group of experts and people involved in an area getting together to work out how to best accomplish agreed goals, whether it could be like teaching or learning kids or making money or producing something. And then I kind of put a second one, since you gave me an extra 30 seconds. They figure out best practices and how to ensure consistency across all, and I use the word production facilities, which could mean classrooms, right?
Love it. I love it. Love it. So many strong themes that we've been able to capture so far. So we're going to build on those themes.
Okay, I think I have a similar one like that. I think I put it on a group of professionals always honestly review one's performance and then seek the way to be better in improvement. Also be proud of a lifelong learner, be open-minded for the innovation and changes to be better.
I get some good additions.
This is great
Okay,
building process.
Good building.
so all of above plus with clear objectives, efficient use of the time and measurable outcomes to assure the continuous improvement of self and broader community.
Thank you for that. I don't know if Dr. Bosco took a
I did.
moment.
It sounded very similar to Catherine's. I had a group of professionals working toward a common goal that involves continuous improvement, a growth mindset, and a coordinated team approach.
Thank you. Took a moment.
So I looked at it obviously through my lens of schools, and I see it as a process by which we, and by we I primarily mean teachers, but certainly our leaders are engaged in it, work collaboratively to increase student learning. That's about teacher learning, but driven by student learning and process of continuous improvement. Similar things.
So I was able to capture and underline some key noticings from all of the share outs. And at the risk of sounding like I'm playing favorites, one of my favorites was workout. To work out towards our goals. And that really resonated with me because so often we hear it's a process, and the reality is we're working out the different variables that are showing us how we're doing towards our goals. And we're working out solutions based on collective inquiry of coming together through collaboration, doing it with consistency. And that I want you to really capture consistency and predictability. There should be zero mystery to any stakeholder that has an interest in that organization about the way in which that organization works things out towards their goals. Efficiency, improvement, objectives, group, consistency. I'd love to share out. So thank you for really intentionally getting in that activity. Next slide, please. So here is a citation from Learning by Doing, Rick Dufour, 2006. I'd be happy to provide the literature after we're done. Educators committed to working collaboratively in the ongoing process of collective inquiry to achieve better results for the students they serve, operating under the assumption that the key to improved student learning is continuous job-embedded learning for educators. Next slide. So what are the characteristics? Characteristic number one, shared mission, vision, values, and goals. What do we mean by this? It means educators in this type of system benefit from clarity regarding their shared purpose and understanding for not only their particular role in the organization, but how their role fits in the larger scheme of operations. Collaborative teams, number two characteristic, collaborative teams focused on learning. In this system, and you guys have really aptly already hit some of these themes in the reflection. In this system, educators work together interdependently in teams to achieve common goals for which they are mutually accountable. The structure of this organization is aligned to ensure each team is provided the time and support essential to the adult learning, with the understanding that in the end, that learning is going to benefit the way in which we set conditions for student learning. Collaboration is a process by which we work out together interdependently to analyze data on our impact. Number three, collective inquiry. These particular models relentlessly question the status quo, seeking new methods of learning, new methods of teaching, and new ways students can demonstrate what they know and what they're able to do. They then test those methods, having clear targets for what they're testing and reflecting on those results together. and they build a shared knowledge of both what their current reality is, as well as where they want those kids to be at the next stage. Number 4, action orientation and experimentation. 5, commitment to continuous improvement. 6, results orientation. A lot to unpack there, but in the interest of time, I'm going to keep us moving. And we're going to turn it over to Dr. Grove.
So Jamal's covered kind of the big picture definition, and you've heard me say before that you can go to virtually any school in this country and they will say they are doing PLCs. And Rick Dufour, who's kind of considered to be the father of the PLCs, made a statement that the phrase PLC has been used in so many different ways that he was very concerned that it began to kind of lose meaning because there wasn't any kind of consensus around what PLC. So much of his work and his professional development was trying to kind of establish, okay, yeah, this is all great, but this is really what PLCs are. And so I very much believe that we need to have a pretty specific definition for what PLCs mean in our district. So I want to spend some time talking about sort of what our vision is for PLCs. And so I believe that PLCs are based upon some core beliefs and mindsets that sort of are the foundation for it. The first is that, for PLCs to be successful, you have to have a belief that every single one of our students can and should learn at a high level if they're given the appropriate instruction and appropriate support. And what that looks like for each kid is going to be different. Because each kid comes to us in a slightly different place and learns in a slightly different way. But if you don't have the belief that all students can learn at a high level, if you think only these kids can learn at a high level and these kids cannot, that isn't, I don't believe, kind of compatible with the PLC model. Second is this belief about collective responsibility. The history of education is that in America is that teachers go into their classroom, they teach their students the way they want to teach their students, they assess them the way they wanted them, and that I as a teacher am responsible for my students, not for all of the students. And if Peter and I are both teaching English 10, that we together are collectively responsible for all of our students, not Peter responsible for his kids and me responsible for my kids. So that there's a mindset of I'm individually and we are collectively responsible for the learning of all of our kids and for each student. Third is that we have an obligation to work to continuously improve and enhance student learning and not just be satisfied because we're high achieving or most of our kids are high achieving and just say, that's good enough. That you have this mindset that, okay, we're doing great, but we can get better. Fourth is the belief that the quality of instruction is the single greatest influence on student learning over which we have control. There's a whole bunch of factors that influence student learning that we have no control over. So we don't want to spend our time trying to address those. We want to work on the thing over which we have control, and that's the greatest leverage. And all of the research would show is that the quality of instruction is the greatest leverage over which we have control. And then the final one is the belief that we have the capacity and capability to achieve high-level learning. That not just the belief that our kids can learn, but that we have the ability to cause them to learn at higher levels, that it's in our control and our capability. So it's that sense of self-efficacy. And that sense of teacher efficacy in the research shows is one of the strongest correlates with student learning. If you have a teacher who believes that they have the ability to take even their lowest learners and get them just the mere belief that they are more likely to achieve those results. So those are kind of what I see as the core mindsets that underlie the PLC process. So next slide, Ben. So as you've seen before, the model of PLCs is really built on 4 questions. What do we want our students to know and be able to do? That translates to what are the learning outcomes that we want, that we believe are most important. The second is how will we know if our students have attained these outcomes at the level that we want them to or the level that we expect? That takes the form of common formative assessments. And then the third, and this is where I believe the real power of PLCs come, the third and the fourth. What will we do when students demonstrate that they have not learned at the level that we expect? Historically, the attitude was, I taught it, they didn't learn it, I'm moving on. And the key and the key change with the PLC is that if we're saying we expect and we believe that all students can learn at this level, if we have some who don't learn at that level, it's not about what do I do next year to try and get more of my students. It's about what am I going to do right now for those who have demonstrated that they have not, to ensure that they do. And if I reteach it and I have a few kids who move up into the proficient range, but I still have, what am I going to do? And what am I going to do? And what am I going to do? That it's not too bad you didn't learn it, I'm moving on, because I have a whole bunch of other stuff to cover.
So how do you what about those students have already learned? That's another area.
That is the fourth question.
Oh,
so
okay.
What will we do when students demonstrate that they have learned at the level expected? So that was actually something when Dufour kind of started doing professional development and around PLCs, there were only 3 questions. It was those first 3 questions, and it really was about getting all students to some minimum level. And as he was doing professional development around this, he had someone ask that question. Well, what do you do with the kids who did learn at that level? Why aren't you also addressing those? And he said, oh, that's a good point. And so it turned into the 4th question of PLCs. And so that is, so when we talk about the first 2 questions are really the tools that you build in order to have the conversations around this, the 3rd and the 4th question. So the first question, what do we want our students to know and be able to do? That takes the form of clearly identified and agreed upon what are the essential learning outcomes. And then for each course and for our course sequence. And then the second one is, okay, how are we going to measure that? You have to build a tool by which you have a common way that you assess whether or not students learn. Because if each of us are teaching the same subject area, the same class, and we don't agree upon the level of attainment that's expected, if we don't have a common expectation around what does proficient look like, then your kids are getting an unequal education, essentially. And so you have to both agree on what does proficiency look like and how are we going to measure it? Because even if we agree on what proficiency looks like, if we're all measuring it in a different way, you don't have any useful data to drive it. So the first 2 are really about tools to get to the conversations around questions 3 and 4, which is where the collaboration comes in. So when you have students that demonstrate that they haven't learned, then it's about collaborative kind of examination and experimentation with instructional practice. It's about developing intervention strategies for the individual students who demonstrated that they didn't learn. And that is both at the classroom level. So me as a teacher, I'm going to go back and intervene with some students in my class who didn't learn. And then it's also about developing school-wide systems of intentional intervention. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like as we move forward. And then when students have demonstrated that they did learn at the level that we want, and if all or almost all of our students achieved at that level on a particular learning outcome, then the conversation becomes, Okay,
No, I'm,
so with the instructional strategies and the curriculum and the instructional materials we use, all or almost all of our students achieved at the level that we expected. So the conversation becomes, do we increase that expectation for all students, right? Or do we offer enrichment and extension off of that? We keep the base level the same, but we look for ways to offer enrichment and extension. And then, so that's really that piece where it's about evaluating, are our overall expectations too low in this area, and should we ratchet them up for all students? Or do we find ways to enrich and extend off of that? Right? So those are kind of the 4 key questions at the core of PLCs. The sort of beliefs about it and the way that we look at it, that PLCs are really a process. That's all it is. It is a process, a collaborative process that we use to continuously examine and improve our practice as educators and student learning. And they kind of, if you think about a through line, it's about the belief that if we improve instructional practice, student learning will improve. And that the measure of the quality of instructional practice is student learning outcomes. It's not perceptions about what's good or bad or who's a good teacher or a bad teacher. It's about the outcomes are the measure that we use. And that is hasn't been a common practice in American education. It has been a lot about, oh, the kids really like that teacher. It's that person has a lot of charisma. It's that, they run a really organized classroom. It hasn't been as much about looking at the actual outcomes that we have as an organization. And as a school district and as a school, I believe our key outcome and our key output is student learning. Cynthia.
So in terms of the understanding if the kids has reached certain standards,
yeah,
this counts with the assessment. I think I think in America, like where I grew up, we have like more like a standardized standard across the class. But here it's more like individual teachers have different assessments. So that's a question I have. How can we be sure that I understand that professional learning exercise will help the teacher to perhaps try to develop more consistent assessment? Can you address that?
When we go back to the learning outcomes, so the first step is, okay, let's again pretend that we are a group of 5 people and we all teach geometry at the same school. We are a PLC, okay? The 5 of us, we are our PLC. And what we are going to do, the first step is we're going to sit down and we're going to say, in our geometry class, when we look at state standards, when we look at external measures like the CAS test, when we look at what students need to know for SAT, when we look at all of this sort of things and what they need to know to be successful when they move on to Algebra 2, the next level, what are the most important learning outcomes? And the ELO's essential learning outcomes, and they're called all kinds of things, critical standards, power standards, there's lots of language, but we use the phrase ELO. When you're identifying those, you are not identifying everything a student will learn and be exposed to in this geometry class. We're going to identify maybe the 15 to 20 most important skills and pieces of knowledge and content that we say our students must learn by the time they leave geometry. And so those become our ELOs. We're not going to agree on that. I will guarantee you, if you got 5 teachers that teach the same thing, they're going to agree on some of it and they're not going to agree on others. But part of the PLC process is that you reach consensus on that. You say, we all agree these are the most important things. And really the difference is what makes it essential. And what I talk to teachers about is these are the things that you say are so important that if students don't learn it at the level that we expect, after we teach it the first time, that we're going to go back and teach it again, and teach it a third time, and teach it a fourth time, until every single one of our kids meets that expectation. ELOs are less about the content and more about our commitment to those, to make ensuring that all kids learn at the level expected. Okay, so that's the first step. Once you've identified that, you have to say, okay, we have to have a common way we're going to assess whether or not students have attained that. So we're going to create common formative assessments, CFAs. And so we are going to collectively create an assessment that we agree measures each of these ELOs and measures them discretely, not you give a test on 4 ELOs and then you get a kid gets an 80% overall, but you don't know whether they've mastered each one of those ELOs. So it has to yield data about each ELO discretely. Okay, so that if Peter takes the assessment and it covers 3 ELOs and he's proficient on 2, I need to know if he's proficient on all 3 and what level of proficiency he is. So that is the purpose of a common formative assessment, is that we're all giving the same assessment at the same point in instruction. And then that yields the results for us to have the collaboration.
So ELO is expected learning outcome.
It's essential, expected, generally is essential. Yeah. Peter?
Have there been any attempts to have the collaborators who create an ELO for a subject be more than just the teachers of that subject, for example, the entire department? So
Yes.
Especially important where there's only one class, only one section, only one teacher of the subject.
Yeah.
It would seem like the value of the department is it's a like-minded community for particular discipline that somewhat overlays any particular subject. And so I would hope that we would have the ELOs developed and the assessments developed at the department level as opposed to subject matter teachers.
So if I can add to that, it's easy with something like geometry to pick what those are.
Yeah.
But when you get into categories like history or ethnic studies or some of the other more squishy subjects, you could make the argument that we ought to even include community members in some of that discussion, because they may have certain feelings about what is essential that students learn or not learn. So is there a consideration for broadening it beyond just, and I'm worried about some of the audience, but I do think that that's something that we need to consider when we're doing some of this work, right?
Yeah, so, and ELOs can be developed in all kinds of different ways. I've seen, so at the high school where I was principal, where I was introducing and developing PLCs, the science department decided not to do it subject-based. They decided to take the cross-cutting concepts and the skills built into the next generation science standards, and it was the exact same skills through the entire science, but it was sort of graduated expectations. Here's what, biology, where most ninth graders are, here's the level of expectation. And they just simply use different rubrics for the classes as the kids went through the science pathway. So it wasn't content specific. They felt like the most important things were the skills rather than students, memorizing the periodic table for chemistry, right? So I've seen them developed that way for individual, and even if you do it course by course and you were to say algebra, here's the most important things, geometry, algebra 2, pre-calc, you absolutely want the entire department in on that so that it is an articulated set of essential learning. So, generally departments will kind of agree upon a framework that they're going to use. If they decide to go course by course, the course alike teachers kind of develop it, and then they get back together as a department to make sure that they kind of adjust it so it is articulated.
Exactly.
Yeah, but have you gone beyond departments?
I've not seen it go beyond departments.
Because it would
I
be,
have seen, I mean, these are content experts, which is what you
Yeah.
want. What I have seen is that when teachers feel that they have developed their ELOs, part of this is that those need to be public. They need to be, the kids need to know, the parents need to know. And I have seen departments and teachers receive feedback from parents that said, hey, what about this? What about that? Why this?
Okay,
And had conversations. And I don't see ELOs ever as static things, that these are dynamic and they are, should and will change over time.
okay.
So build on that one, so that means right now we have 2 high schools, so even for the algebra, it could be one set for this, one set for that, or are we doing the collaborated model to get the best practices or things like that?
So we'll get to that in just a minute about kind of our approach.
We only have 20 minutes left.
Okay.
And we haven't even gotten to the good stuff yet.
Yeah, right.
so I wanted to
Let's go.
provide 2 supportive comments about the question you raised, enrichment and extension, as opposed to raising expectations. I'm in favor of the enrichment and extension. The other is you threw away attempts to improve students as opposed to the process of teaching. And by that, I mean, I would think there's a value in trying to assess student motivation and confidence in a particular subject to see if there can be some remediation to help improve the outcome. That's separate from the teaching process.
So the PLC process can be applied to, so I mean, it could be applied to, you could develop a set of ELOs that are social emotional or study skills or graduate profile outcomes. So the process is exactly the same. It's just about what you're focusing on
Yes.
and what the learning
Okay.
outcomes or the
Yeah.
student outcomes that you're trying to achieve. The exact same process applies to that. And what you typically will see is, particularly in a high school setting, that it will start with kind of academics because that's where teachers are comfortable with their content. And you kind of develop their capacity to do PLCs. And then you start to say, okay, how else do we apply this? To what other contexts and outcomes?
Although an entry point for our district and where we might have some buy-in is around the graduate program.
Yes.
competencies and meeting it first.
Yeah.
Where we are focused.
So getting back to the slide, so the second point is that PLCs are an ongoing cyclical process. It's not something you complete and then move on to some other initiative. It is just the way that we work continuously. So my hope is that if we do this well, that after I retire, I can come back to this district in 10 years and PLCs are still functioning and operating at a higher level even than when I left. And that is that third point, that our goal is that we establish and embed both the culture and processes of PLCs so that they endure despite any staff or leadership changes over time. Because we know we're going to have turnover in teachers, and we know we're going to have turnover in site leadership, and we know we're going to have turnover in district leadership. And if you do PLCs well, it becomes part of the culture of how you work and the systems of how you work. And it doesn't matter who the principal is, it doesn't matter who the department chair is, and it doesn't matter how many new teachers. In fact, my experience is that this process makes life so much easier for new teachers coming into a department because it is clearly identified. Here are the most important outcomes. Here's how we're going to measure it. Here's how we're going to work together to help to improve our practice. And then the final piece is that our vision is that evidence of student learning drives the work. That points the direction. It doesn't matter whether you love the Civil War unit or not. If that's not one of the ELOs, that's not where you should be devoting your time.
So
Okay.
just a like in terms of the mechanism.
Yep.
So I suppose we have professional development day built into our schedule, district-wide. And then also we have departmental meetings. And so like during the departmental meetings, I think we will have some kind of like notes taking to make sure we have a more because I heard in the past, sometimes the departmental meeting might not be used as effectively. But like if we will really try to follow this process, we will have like action plan and then just keep some kind of record for the departmental meeting or even side meetings.
So most department meetings in schools are business driven, right? They're doing departmental business. And oftentimes if you ask teachers, well, do you collaborate? They say, yeah, we have department meetings all the time.
Yeah.
And this is a big focus of PLCs is that collaboration is the definition of collaboration within a PLC is very different than what most teachers traditionally have believed collaboration is about. And that's not to say departments don't need to meet to take care of department business, to work on master schedule, to look at budgets, to order instructional supplies, to do that sort of business, but that's not collaboration, that's business. Okay, so they have to have time to do that, but that's not collaboration. And so, or they say, wow, we have lunch together 3 days a week and we share ideas, but it's not based upon looking at evidence of student learning and reflecting on our own practice. That's just kind of sharing of ideas. Dufour calls it co-collaboration as opposed to collaboration.
Yeah.
And that has value too, that informal time where people just kind of share ideas and think about things. But within the construct of PLC, that isn't collaboration because it is not looking at what did our students learn or not, and those that didn't, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to change our instruction in order to achieve that?
So after this study section, would that be this become a focus for our ongoing or in the future of the PD days?
So I'm gonna continue. We're actually gonna skip an activity because we're running a little bit short. So yes, but
Okay.
let me kind of get to that.
Okay.
So Ben, if you could move on to the, keep going, there you go. So there's the concept of kind of, you may be familiar with it in other contexts, the concept of, in terms of leadership, loose and tight. And the idea is that there are certain expectations around which you are very tight. And these are expectations that are non-negotiable. And then the loose piece of it is allowing the freedom and creativity for people to kind of work together to figure out, okay, if these are the expectations and these are the parameters within we have to work, giving people latitude and freedom to figure out how they get there. And so our approach to PLCs and the leadership of it, I'm going to run through the tight and the loose. One expectation is that all teachers in the department are engaged in the work of PLCs. So there's two ways to kind of do this. You can be very top down and say, okay, the essential learning outcomes, we're going to pull a few teachers. So if you want to do this district wide, you could take, 2 AP US history teachers from Los Gatos, 2 from Saratoga, have them get together, have them create the ELOs, have them create the common formative assessments, and then go back to their colleagues and say, okay, here's the ELOs and the common formative assessments for our AP classes district-wide. That isn't the way that I believe that you should do it, because the conversation of having every US history teacher at Los Gatos High School sit down together and argue about and reach consensus on the ELOs and the best way to assess them, I believe, is both professional development in and of itself, and the teachers come away with ownership of the outcome. They own the ELOs and they own those common formative assessments because they were involved in the creation of them. Lots of different districts do it top down. They take small groups out, they create it, and they go back and give it. And the teachers that receive it that weren't involved in the creation of it say, okay, that's great. And they'll give the common assessment, but it has no meaning to them because they don't own it. And they weren't involved and they didn't learn and have the arguments about what was most important and why in their classes and what is the best way to assess this and why. So
And every time you have teacher turnover, what happens?
they are, these are dynamic documents, right? And so if I'm a new teacher in a department and someone hands me the ELOs and I think something is missing, then I should bring that up in one of our collaboration meetings. Or if I don't believe that that's an appropriate assessment, that's part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So our expectation is that all teachers in a department are engaged in PLCs, and that is in the creation of ELO. And that means that we're doing this site-based, not district-based. So, we will have essential learning outcomes for each course, and I hear some O's.
About site versus district.
Yes. So we'll have essential, so it's the tight expectation, we will have essential learning outcomes for each course. And, we need to kind of decide whether we're doing it for singleton electives or whether we're, focusing on, every single course, or where's our focus first. So common formative, we have to have common formative assessments to measure each ELO, and each ELO must be measured discretely, not in combination. That there has to be collaborative analysis of the assessment results, and that that there is data-driven action. So what that means is when you get a set of assessment results from one of our common formative assessments, you have to take immediate action for the individual students who didn't perform at the level expected. And you need to have ongoing instructional refinement about, okay, how did we do overall? We look at an individual level as well as how did all of our students do, and what do we do to get better next time we teach it? So there's both the immediate reteach for those, as well as how do we improve long-term over time. And then the final piece is that these assessment results are not used as a tool for evaluation or judgment of teachers. If you add that dynamic in there, PLCs will not operate, and it will not be about learning, because teachers will be terrified that they're being judged based upon their assessment results. And it will eliminate all collaboration. So that is kind of a tight commitment that we make as part of this. So what does that mean in terms of loose? It means that.
So, I'm sorry, can I ask a question about that? So without necessarily evaluating or judging a teacher, if you see that certain teachers are consistently not reaching the same level of results from the common assessments, is there at least a recognition that something needs to be done to help that teacher to improve their teaching methods so that the students will see a higher level of success?
Yep. And so that is part of the development of this kind of sense of collective responsibility.
Okay.
That if the five of us sit down and I'm coming in and on our common formative assessments, my kids are consistently performing at the bottom of this.
Right.
It is the responsibility both of my team members to say, okay, and this is a built-in part of the PLC process, is that each of us comes with our results. And this is a huge change for most of our teachers to sit down and demonstrate on this ELO, only 62% of my kids were proficient. And you had 87% of your kids who were proficient. And that takes a lot of trust to
Yes.
be willing to sit down and do that. And to then say, why?
Right.
Okay, David, what did you do?
Yeah.
You had 87% of your kids. What did you do? How did you do that? What instructional strategies did you use? What materials did you use? How much time did you spend on it? Because the idea here is that not that we all do the exact same thing in the classroom.
Right.
Right? You want people experimenting and trying different things, but that you then look at the results of that experimentation so that we can learn from each other and improve my practice. So that's a built-in piece. And then, administrators need to be aware of that. If there is clearly, someone who is not performing, to figure out how do I better support that person.
I can build on that, on the administrator piece at a very practical level. Ultimately, it'd be in the interest of the principal to have a variety of ways to understand how a particular team is functioning. One of those ways is you're looking at the student outcome data, and then if I'm seeing your example, wow, Cynthia's kids just aren't hitting the targets that I'm seeing Catherine's and David. So then I might go to my department chair offline. Hey, David, how's it going? Tell me about the meetings. I don't need to tell you what my data shows. I just want to check in. And depending on how that conversation goes, I could apply some additional site leader, because principals are instructional leaders. I can apply some additional. So in the event you would say, I just haven't seen the same level of rigor from Cynthia in our meetings, level of discussion, something might be going on. And then I'll just take that under advisement and I continue to employ ways that I check how things are going. So in terms of the indirect ways where we can use evaluative measures, like if I were to hear, Cynthia's just not showing up prepared. We're all expected to come to our meetings with data so we can evaluate how we're doing. So then right away, then I kick into an evaluative session, not about the tool that Dr. Grove has already committed to every teacher. This is not going to be used to evaluate you. However, we have some professional behaviors that absolutely fall under the district's board policies and the evaluation process. And so I could just kick in to that process right there.
So another point I want to bring up is I think it is common in our school district. If the kids are not getting what they need to learn in the classroom, there's outside help, tutors, parents, so I think that's a factor. I think it's to some extent it's beyond our control. But so say my students are not, I'm just not performing. Perhaps Catherine's students are getting like all the tutors outside. So that's something we need to keep that in mind. I think it's happening in Los Gatos, in Saratoga, across, and then the parents also.
And that's part of the process of building intentional school-based during the school day interventions, both in the classroom for me as a teacher with my kids, not just again moving on, but I'm going to loop back and do some as well as collectively. So like, for example, one of the things I've seen is departments taking a day after an assessment, and the 5 of us are all teaching the same course. And we kind of say, okay, instead of me teaching my kids on this day that are in my 3rd period class, each period, Peter's kids did really well on this concept. Any kids in my class who weren't proficient in that are doing Peter on that day. Peter's kids who didn't do well in this concept are coming to me, and we swap kids around and we reteach on that day. So those are systemic kind of school-wide interventions that they can come up with. Then using time like tutorial. And instead of tutorial just being kids go wherever they want or sit and do homework, you're doing intentional intervention on those days. And that's also where you can do the extension with the kids who were proficient and try to do enrichment and extension activities with those kids.
And we have observed that happening at Los Gatos High School when we visit the school, like the teacher were reteaching to a group of kids their math class instead, because one thing we heard over and over, oftentimes tutorial periods being used as one one-to-one, which is similar to office hour for teachers. So that's something we can keep in mind. That could be a repeat.
So one of the aspects of that too, that I kind of wonder is the whole concept of learning styles. Maybe that's no longer a popular viewpoint, but, and generally, different kids will learn with different styles, right? I mean, we all kind of have things that we're most common with. Has there been any thought to try to look at teachers have certain teaching styles and matching that with the learning styles? Like some teachers are much more interactive, a lot of group discussions, other kids are more directive. Kids might learn in one way better than others. Has there been any thought to try to match kids with their learning styles to teachers with their teaching styles? Or is that just to add too much complexity to the overall scheduling nightmare that we already face?
I would say two things. One, yes, it would add a level of complexity that I just don't know that you could pull off. And then second, that to me buys into the idea that kids should be adapting to a teacher's teaching style as opposed to a teacher changing their teaching style and differentiating their teaching style to meet the needs of the kids that are in front of them.
Okay. You're saying they should.
I believe that teachers should change their instruction and differentiate to meet the needs of the kids who are in front of them. Not, this is the way I've always taught it.
Yeah.
And a certain percentage that works for a certain percentage of my kids. And, generally it works for most of them. So that's the way I'm going to keep going. It's that commitment to all kids are going to learn at this level. And if they're not, it's up to me to change my instruction or to reteach in a different way so that those kids who didn't do.
Okay.
Have there been any studies which try to correlate student characteristics with student outcomes? As an example, I suggested that as part of the assessment process, students' confidence and motivation get assessed so that can form data to help the teachers understand what may be holding back achievement or outcomes.
I don't know whether there is existing research on it. So I would guess that there probably is at the very least relevant research to that, whether it's been studied in that exact way.
It may be that psychologists, educational psychologists have more understanding.
Just a quick comment. I really like the PLC model, and I think one of the example you mentioned, we teach certain area, and that's exactly what was happening. What was happening when I visit the Los Gatos High School, the math department. So the teacher gave a test, and then the next day she got the result, and then certain subject, so you can very target, which genre the student didn't catch it. So that day when we visit, she already posted, this is what I'm going to reteach at my tutorial time. So we see the 4 of the students sit there ready to learn that subject. So I think that's something we need to be amplifying or promoted or encouraged, and I think that's the best use, one of the best way to help the tutorial.
And that's, again, one of the strengths of the PLC model is that is an expectation for us collectively. It's not that, okay, 40% of my individual students didn't learn at the level expected, so it's my sole responsibility to remediate all of those students. It is our responsibility, because we're all responsible for the kids in geometry, not I'm responsible for my 130 kids and you're responsible for your 130 kids. So it is about us collectively figuring out how are we going to intervene with those who didn't, and how are we going to enrich and extend for those who did.
So that was an example because that teacher was the department chair. So after the presentation at the board meeting, about the math department, and they actually already have the inventory of similar to our ELO here. they say which class, whatever the, learning outcome, they have documented. And then after that, we went to the school visit. And so she posted that thing. And actually, I believe that day they are students from different teacher, but know ahead of time, this is the subject she's going to cover. So that classroom is full of the students. So that was a good example.
Yep.
And that was quite a few years back,
Yeah.
So-
early years.
That's an example of kind of the loose piece of it is that we want sites to kind of develop their plan because we have examples of course-alike groups or departments
Yeah.
that are operating pretty closely to PLCs already.
Right.
So we don't need to take them back, right? We need to figure out where they are. So that's part of our plan is that we want sites to kind of come up with what's the implementation plan and differentiate for where various groups are. We have some departments that have no characteristics of a PLC, right? And so we need to start from ground zero with them, while others, we need to kind of take them where they are. So it is site-based kind of implementation, figuring out what professional development they need to do, differentiate based on the status of different groups. We want sites to develop their own methods of accountability for PLCs because, we will have people that will not show up for PLC meetings. And so the sites need to figure out how they're going to hold each other accountable for full and active participation. We will have people that show up to PLC meetings and sit there and do their email the whole time and don't participate. So we need to develop a culture of accountability and that's all kind of site-based. We're not going to have, district attendance that's being taken.
And the reason district is done is because it's impractical. Is that?
Yes. It's impractical. And when you're doing this and getting collective commitments to each other in the room and the teachers begin to hold each other
Yeah.
accountable, it's much more powerful than
Having somebody direct it.
But is it shared between sites? So the results of the PLC for a site that
yeah. So I mean, I can tell you as a former principal, when we were, doing this, and then when I led it at the district level, at regular meetings where that's all we did, where I had 10 principals and myself, and we would just sit and say, how's it going? What's working for you? What are you doing for this? What are the common problems? And sometimes we would identify there's a common need for some professional development. Okay, so that's the role of the district and if there's a common need for professional development, to come in and support that and to provide the structure and to provide the type. What are the non-negotiables that everyone has to meet, and then give the sites the flexibility to kind of do this. Kathy?
Oh, sorry.
So the ELO right now, we're talking about the process for the PLC. But so that the front end, we develop the ELO or whatever the criteria we have. But what about the execution? Because recent cases we have is, the one teacher share with the same identical the course, planning and things like that was another one. But you have that thing, but how you execute it in the classroom is make a huge difference on that one.
So,
But that's sort of the point of as
Yeah.
long as the end result is that all of your students have reached those essential learning outcomes. The whole idea that the teachers are teaching using different methods is not relevant. That's part of the whole idea, is that teachers can teach in their own unique ways, as long as the end result is that students learn what they need to learn. Right?
So how
That's
do you-
kind of the idea.
Will you do any kind of student survey?
Yeah.
Would that be a piece built into it in terms of the assessment?
Yes.
Because I think students.
assessment of what?
So what are you
Of
trying
what
to
they
ask?
learn.
So what you're asking is you're asking a teacher student, did they like how they learned their essential learning
No,
outcome?
that's.
And who's the most popular
That's too
teacher?
simple. That's too simple.
No,
Mike.
no, no, no.
If you have a common formative assessment that tells you whether or not the student reached an essential learning outcome, then how they reached it is not relevant.
But I'm not talking about how they reach it. I'm just saying, like, even a lot of teachers are doing like those informal, like survey from the student, because like if
Yeah.
I'm teaching something, I want to get something that, so that's
But
just something.
that's not part of the
But that's
PLC
not-
process, but
yeah.
that doesn't mean you don't do it.
Yeah, but I would like that being part of the consideration if possible, because otherwise, the students are our clients, when you think about it. We
Julie,
really
can you
have to
Advance to the
address
next
their,
slide.
their
So
needs.
I think we're way over.
Yeah, way over.
So Mike,
your
we're way
time.
over when you need to leave.
I have my
So-
student advisory group at Los Gatos.
Okay, so I think you ought to get to that and we
Yeah, keep it
kind of finish this at
Yeah.
another time.
Yeah.
So
So
there's one other point I wanted to make that I've been trying to kind of get an opportunity to bring up is that I really like this process. I think this is great. I think the whole idea of having
No
some
doubt.
essential outcomes and
Mhm.
accommodative assessment,
Mhm.
this is awesome. The thing that I worry about, and maybe it's because I've seen it in some of my family and I've seen it in other kids, is that it's really important that we get the kids at the bottom coming up. The
Right.
problem we have is that kids learn at different rates and they have different strengths and weaknesses. And I've seen a lot of kids that get lost because we put so much effort on making sure that we bring the kids all up to the same level. And they're already way beyond that. And they're like, they're like, why am I even at school? Because I'm not learning anything.
Yeah.
And it's a waste of my time. And so I think it's really important that that fourth question is strongly addressed when we do PLCs, that we need to have a way to understand early whether these kids already know this. And if they do, then we need to find a way to help them develop so that they don't feel that their whole year is lost or their
Yeah.
whole time is lost. Because that's when we start having kids that have other kinds of problems in
Yeah.
school. And it affects their lives all the way through, because I've seen it with kids that I know.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really a key part of the PLC, is not just getting the kids that are struggling up. I think that's absolutely critical, and I don't want to discard that, but we lose kids because we teach at such a level that lets everyone keep up. And they're like, it's too slow for them. And so they just kind of lose all interest in school. And then they become some of our fails,
Yeah.
not because they don't understand it, but because they just simply they can't work at that speed. So I just think that's something that's really an important part of it. And then I think we ought to try to move on, and then we can come back and finish this at another time,
And
if
I
that's
totally
okay with
agree.
you.
I totally agree.
Because I think,
we need to talk about kind of how we implement this and what the challenges are in implementing this and timelines. So
yeah, and I'd like to give it the time it deserves, because this is core to what we do as a district. And it is absolutely critical. I don't think anyone on the board would disagree with this being one of the most top priority that we have.
Yeah.
So I really want to give it the time it deserves, and we don't have that now.
So I'd like to draw a parallel, although it may be shocking, between processes. Well, I'm going to say the emphasis on process. And Silicon Valley, those of us who work in industry understand manufacturing processes. And there's a quality process. And what we're doing was we're saying the teachers are the machine tools and the students are the materials that are being formed into the end product. And so you have a quality assurance process to make sure that there are standards that every product meets by the time it gets shipped. And when it doesn't meet it, you have to decide the root cause. Is it the machine tools or is it the materials that failed? And so I would like to see an outside party who is familiar with manufacturing processes look at and give a cross-field fertilization thoughts about how that could be applied to learning.
So I actually 100% disagree with that, because we are not making a bunch of widgets. And we want all
I'm
the
talking
kids
about
to be the
process.
same widget or the same.
Right.
Because manufacturing process is designed to end up with the exact same thing at the end of that process.
No,
So
it's a
that it
minimum standard, like strength of
Give
a,
me a break. If you want an iPhone, you want every single iPhone to be the same. You don't want some iPhones to be brilliant in math and other iPhones to be brilliant in history.
So
It doesn't work that
You're
way.
taking a
Okay.
different
I gotta
interpretation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
So I was, for example, a chain. Let's say you're
No.
manufacturing
So-
chains and you want to have a minimum
I'm
strength.
gonna run, but I think,
yeah, we just have the public comment and then we're done.
Yeah.
So we're.
Okay.
and then you and David you guys can argue.
And then we can argue.
Afterwards, yeah.
Just, I think there's a
Actually adjourn the
value,
meeting.
there's a value in having somebody familiar with manufacturing process quality to look at the
Well.
the
I-
PLC
yeah,
process.
Peter,
We can
just
talk
give
that when we
respect,
get
I
to the
guess.
next, when we
No, no,
get
no,
back to
but
this
you're not in
subject.
that field where I would respect
Oh,
Catherine's
okay,
view.
so we can.
Okay, so, all right, so I think we're finished. Thank you very much, Dr. Splain,
Thank you
for
all.
leading this discussion. This, like I said earlier, this is, in our opinion, it's got to be one of our top priorities.
I agree.
Yes.
To ensure that we do what's best for our students and that we support them all and get them all to these ELOs. That's really important.
Thank you all for your time this morning. Appreciate
So-
you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think next step is public comment. I see no public comment on the report discussion, so we're ready to adjourn. And with that, so thank you.